Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 20th of February of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. This evening, it has become clear that the world is moving to a chaos. And of course, the best way to survive during the chaos is to discuss aliens that most likely will visit our planet very, very soon, at least, probably according to the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. Today, he stated, once again, let's discuss the situation, that Donald Trump has stated that he intends to publish information related to aliens. But as we discussed during the previous video, most likely, this is not about aliens. Maybe we will receive some data that they are living somewhere on some other planet, and people will start discussing this. We will receive lots of created YouTube channels and different channels discussing the situation. We will start geolocate aliens in the sky and in the universe. So lots of things will happen, and obviously all these things have just one purpose: to distract our attention from Iran, because most likely the Iranian military operation is inevitable. Most likely the strike is imminent, and the question is when exactly the states are planning to begin this operation. And this is the most important question, not just for us, but also for the Iranians, for the Americans, for the Chinese, for the Europeans, and for the Russian Federation. And you know that today we received a very interesting article. More precisely, today we received the exact dates when the President of the United States of America is planning to visit China. According to information we have, he's going to travel to China on the 31st of March of 2026, which means that most likely the United States of America are planning to finish the Iranian military operation right exactly before this date. So, or at least they're planning to make the main job of this military operation right exactly by this date. And the President of the United States of America will travel to China just with one single purpose: to make a deal, to make a favorable deal for the United States of America. Most likely by this time, by the 31st of March of 2026, the Iranians will lose their capabilities to sell oil through the world. Basically, they will not be able to do this because they would be completely blocked by the United States of America. But Trump will travel to China with the Venezuelan oil, and probably with a deal that the oil from Iran also could be sold to China through the United States of America. So everything is possible. So that is why we believe that the timings for the Iranian military operations are about between the 1st of March of 2026 and the 31st of March of 2026. So just 31 days for this operation. And due to the fact that the meeting has been already scheduled between Xi Jinping and Trump, this means that the United States of America are pretty 100% sure that they will be able to finish everything within this, let's say, period of time. And we see that nobody can help the Iranians. The Russians are completely focused on their own issues. The Russians probably would like to send some missiles and air defense systems to Iran with the purpose, so at least to improve their cards and to make their positions much stronger during the upcoming talks between states and Iran. But the Russians are not able to do this because the Ukrainians, probably it's already 5th or 10th day in a row when the Ukrainians are attacking deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation with hundreds of cheap drones that probably costs maybe 100, maybe 500, maybe $1,000, and the Russians are forced to bring these drones down with very expensive missiles. Of course, the Russians are trying to adapt to this situation. During the previous days, we received lots of videos of how Russians were bringing down these drones with helicopters, and obviously this will probably reduce the costs and or costs for Russians in their air defense. They will be able to bring down these drones, cheap drones of the armed forces of Ukraine, with less expensive weapons, not with missiles. And these missiles, of course, the Russians would try to accumulate on, of course, if it's possible, maybe even to send it to Iran. Maybe not. Maybe the Russians will not do this because who knows what exactly the Ukrainians are planning to do next. So the Russians are trying to adapt, but anyway, we understand that most likely they are not able to help the Iranians because the Ukrainians will continue bombing and attacking the territory of the Russian Federation with hundreds of missiles and probably with hundreds of drones and probably with missiles. But at the same time, the Russians Russians are trying to stabilize the situation around Cuba. So we believe that the United States of America, this is another evidence, another proof why the states most likely are planning to finish the situation with Iran within the months, because somewhere at this moment the situation on the territory of Cuba will worsen as well. So as for Cuba, I believe you understand that they used to have oil, they used to get oil from Venezuela, but due to blockade and due to sanctions from the United States of America, Cuba is no longer receiving oil from the territory of Venezuela. And according to information we have, Russia is the only supplier of Cuba with oil, with crude oil, but obviously this is too expensive and too far to supply Cuba with oil. It will help the Cubans to hold on for another day or another month or something like this, but this will not stabilize the situation. So as of now, it's very difficult to understand the pace of usage of Cuban oils, of what the level of their what is the level of oil the Cubans have right now. But it seems that within a month the situation will become critical, and the United States of America will return back to the Caribbean area. As for Ukraine, we received today lots of very interesting updates. Today, the Russians and the pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian and neutral sources stated and published lots of articles that Zelensky has ordered that the development of a war plan for another 3 years until the end of Donald Trump's term, writes Wall Street journalist Boyan Panchevsky. So this is a very interesting situation, and we don't need to wait for the upcoming 3 years, obviously, because we are waiting for the midterm elections that are going to take place in November of 2026, and then we will understand everything. Because if the Republicans are able to win, these midterm elections, of course, there is no need to wait for Zelensky for another 3 years, and most likely he would be forced to accept something from the Russian side. But if Democrats wins during the midterm elections, obviously the situation will change for Ukraine, for the Russian Federation, of course, for the Republican Party. So according to Panchevsky, Zelensky issued this order immediately after the Munich Security Conference. I would like to remind you that during this conference and during the Ramstein meeting, Ukraine received a lot of money from the European countries. I would like to remind you that the Ramstein team group promised him more than 38 billion of dollars, and we received, for example, today another statement, another report that, for example, Sweden announced the 21st military aid package for Ukraine. The Swedish government has decided on a new 21st military aid package for Ukraine worth about 1.2 billion. So Ukraine right now is receiving lots of money from the European countries, and Zelensky obviously is confident that he will be able to continue conflict with the Russian Federation this year. He will have lots of money, he will have lots of weapons and so on. So that is why I don't think that he has any problems with this. So what makes me most skeptical is Vladimir Zelensky personal meeting with his closest advisors last Thursday, February 12th. There he stated that the negotiations had failed, and now they must develop a war plan for another 3 years. But I would like to remind you that before this meeting in Geneva, Zelensky and some people from his team were working on a bill that allows Ukraine to have elections during the martial law, during the war period of time, and so on. But from the other side, we see and we receive, we continue receiving, we're keeping receiving lots of signals from Ukraine that not everything is so simple. Today we received the report that Zaluzhny again publicly attacked Zelensky. I would like to remind you that Zaluzhny is a former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, and he stated in an interview with The Guardian that Zelensky refused to declare martial law on the eve of the second military operation, of the special military operation, despite warnings from the military. So this is the third or the fourth attack from Zaluzhny. Several days ago, he blamed Zelensky that it was his mistake and his failure failure, and let's say he was responsible for the failure of the counteroffensive for 2023. Later, he stated that somebody from the presidential office was responsible for several missiles attack on his base, on his headquarters, and now he's blaming Zelensky that he's responsible for not declaring a martial law right before the beginning of the conflict with the Russian Federation. Zelensky, from his side, blamed Zaluzhny that he is responsible for the Nord Stream attacks and that Zelensky didn't have anything common with that operation. So we see that attacks are coming from everywhere, and we see that this is something like a chaos. And obviously somebody is controlling this chaos. The question is, who is behind all this? The Russians, from their side, during the previous nights, launched another massive drone attack. They used 129 drones, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, and one Iskander-M ballistic missile. The Russians, once again, were attacking objects of energy infrastructure, and during the day we received lots of videos of what exactly the Russians attacked. The sources reported that the Russians attacked the substation in the Nikolaev region. The Russians attacked the territory to the east of the city of Dnipro. This time the Russians were attacking objects of energy infrastructure or some warehouse around the settlement of Vasilki. Furthermore, we had a report that the Russians attacked several times the southern part of the city of Zaporozhye. This time the Russians were attacking this substation. We had several videos from this area. In this video we can see the consequences of Russian attack. The source reported Russians used 2 Geran drones to strike this substation, and later we received this video. We can see the fire right after attack, then some explosion, and we can see military forces in this area. So the Russians continue bombing this territory, and the sources reported that Russians also attacked oil depot in the area of the Poltava region. I would like to remind you that Poltava region has the worst situation in Ukraine when talking about energy situation with gas, with heat, and so on. So the chaos is continues developing through the world. Let's wait and see, of course, what is going to be next, but obviously lots of interesting things are awaiting for us. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation despite Ukraine attempts to attack in the north. The Russians are focused on 3 settlements: the settlement of Ristvyanka, Vozdvizhivka, and Verkhnya Tersa. The Russians are pushing in this area, and the Russians are bombing and attacking everything behind this defense layer. So now this is the main line of combat contact. The Russians are tasked to establish complete control over these 3 cities, and most likely after the end of the battle for these 3 settlements, the Russian major offensive operation towards the city of Zaporozhye will begin. So once again, currently the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over everything along this red line, and when Russians finish the battle for this territory, then they will start their major offensive operation towards the city of Zaporozhye. And I would like to remind you that Zelensky is planning to fight with the Russians for 3 more years with money that Europeans are giving him. Of course, most likely he will be able to do this. As for the northern directions, the Russians, of course, are trying to stabilize the situation, but the western direction is more important for Russians. As for the northern directions, the Russians are using lots of aviation. They're bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area with aviation, trying to slow down the Ukrainians and trying to slow down their reinforcements and reserves that is heading towards the south, towards the line of combat contact. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours, the map has been adjusted. So this is the end of the 18th of February. This is the end of the 19th of February. Pro-Ukrainian sources stated that Russians began infiltration in the northern direction, trying to improve their positions around the settlement of Grishina. By the end of the 20th of February, we received the report that the Russians managed to reach the northwestern part of the settlement, and it seems that the battle for the settlement of Grishna is about to be finished. This information was provided by pro-Ukrainian sources, so the Russians are keeping advancing, and we see that the days for the settlement of Grishna are numbered. With the fall of the settlement of Grishna, the Russians will answer the Dnipropetrovsk operational space, and then they will continue offensive operation further, trying to outflank the settlement of Dobropolye. So lots of things are going to happen in this area within the next 2 or 3 3 months. As for the Konstantinovka direction, currently there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians managed to bring additional forces to the line of combat contact, and now they're trying to stabilize the situation along the settlements of Dovga, Balka, Raskoshna and the southwestern part of the city. There are very heavy clashes. The Russians are pushing the Ukrainians. And as for the Slaviansk direction, from this area we received lots of very important updates. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the map in this area has been adjusted once again. We have huge changes along the MO3 road, and we have huge changes in the Kriva Luka foothold. Let's discuss everything in details. As for the MO3 road, the Russians, according to information we have, improved their position significantly. This is the end of the 19th of February, and this is the end of the 20th of February. The Russians are keeping advancing along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal as of now, without attempts to move in the western direction towards the Kramatorsk defense layer. So the Russians are trying to avoid this operation. As of now, they're just focused to advance in the northern direction. Furthermore, the Russians are finishing the battle for the fortified territories around the settlement of Golubovka, and it seems that Russians in coming days will be able to maintain the lines and to maintain the line to the south of the settlement of Fedorovka Druga along this red line. Furthermore, the Russians are keeping advancing towards this huge forest from the area of Grigorovka. So these are the changes on the ground, and according to the vectors and directions of Russia of the infiltration zone growth, we see that the Russians are trying to encircle Ukrainians in these huge forests from the southwest and from the northeast. We are talking about this territory. There is a very big forest that Ukrainians are using as a fortified area, and of course the Russians would try first to force Ukrainians to fall back rather than to assault this territory with infantry. And if Russians are able to improve their positions on these flanks, obviously this will force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory further in the northwestern direction toward the settlement of Alexandrovka. Of course, as of the 20th of February, there is still a space that Ukrainians can use for retreat, but in coming months, this space would be shortened significantly, and then there would be nowhere to retreat, because either there would be a Slaviansk right behind the Ukrainian backs, or even the territory behind the city of Slaviansk, which means the end of the Donbas region. Another important piece of news is that the Russians, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, as a result of clashes, managed to improve their position significantly around the settlement of Kriva Luka. Basically, the settlement of Kriva Luka was encircled by the Russians from the south without any chances for Ukrainians to save their positions there. Now the Ukrainians need to think how to retreat. Most likely they will try to retreat using these roads between the river of Seversky Donetsk and this small street by the name of Karsunskovskaya Street, which is also a part of Kriva Luka, and the Ukrainians would try to stabilize the situation through this huge forest along the river of Seversky Donetsk and these tree lines and fortifications. So this is the next defense layer that Ukrainians will try to hold for as long as possible before the beginning of the battle for the Slaviansk agglomeration. So the Kriva Luka is about, the settlement of Kriva Luka is about to be taken by Russians, it seems, and this is the most important and the most fortified area in this region, because there are lots of strategical elevations, as you can see, lots of hills that completely fortified by Ukrainians in the past, and these fortified areas are about to be taken by Russians. Of course, the Russians will improve their position there, they will install additional equipment, and from these hills the Russians will begin, let's say, improving their positions and establishing complete control over the cities of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk with FPV drones. As for the Liman direction, nothing special has happened during the previous 24 hours. We have already discussed everything. We have a video with the Russian flag in the most eastern part of the settlement of Svetogorsk, which means that the Russians are already there and the Russians are keeping advancing. There are very heavy clashes for this huge forest to the east of the city of Izum, and this is already the second battle for this, or the third battle for this forest. Two battles took place in 2022 during the beginning of the conflict, then during the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation Kharkiv, and now the Russians are entering this forest once again in 2025, 4 years after the beginning of the conflict and after the first battles for this territory ended. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Kharkiv and in the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions. Maybe this is the wrong statement. But the Russians, we received confirmation, video confirmation that Russians control everything to the northeast and to the east of the city of Kupiansk. So this is the end of the 19th of February and this is the end of the 20th of February. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see how Ukrainians of 14th Mechanized Brigade were attacking Russians to the east of the settlement of Kupiansk. Lots of episodes, one of them was geolocated right exactly at this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we see that it seems that Ukraine counter-offensive operation in the area of the city of Kupiansk lost its momentum, its initiative, and now the Ukrainians once again are retreating towards the river of Oskol from the east and sometimes even on the Ukrainian bank of the river. And due to this configuration and due to the current situation around the city of Kupiansk, we believe that before May of 2026 the Ukrainians will lose any control over the settlement, and the Russians most likely will be able to get a strong control over the territory and over the Ukrainian side of the river. It's just speculations from my side, of course. Everything might happen once again. The Ukrainians may launch another counteroffensive in this region, but as of the current situation and the things that are coming from the front line, this is exactly how the situation is developing. As for the Kharkiv direction, we start receiving lots of updates from the territory of the settlement of Kazachia Lopань. Today we received another video how Russians bombed and destroyed a temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine in the central part of the city, and if we increase the numbers since the beginning of this month, we will receive lots of updates from the territory of the city of Kazachia Lopань and from all these villages around the settlement of Kazachia Lopань and to the north of the city of Kharkiv. And it seems that maybe the Russians do have some plans to begin another offensive operation in this region with the purpose to expand the buffer zone to the southwest of the city of Belgrade. So let's wait and see. Maybe this is not going to be a primary task of Russians for the 2026, but as a secondary attack, and depending on how the things are developing through the entire line of combat contact, maybe the Russians will improve the priority of this offensive operation as well. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds that we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.